Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our 75th commemoration of D-Day. My name is Dr. Jason Dawsey, research historian with the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy. As is our tradition here at the museum, we always want to start by recognizing our World War II veterans. Do we have any World War II veterans with us this afternoon? If so, please stand or wave and be recognized for us. Do we have any women and men who served on the home front during World War II with us today? Any Holocaust survivors with us here today? I want to make sure to recognize your experience as well. And then finally, all our veterans post-World War II, please stand or wave to be recognized. Our program today would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. A special thank you to D.G. Yingling & Son Incorporated, America's oldest brewery, family-owned and operated since 1829, celebrating its 190th year. RPM Pizza, largest Domino's pizza franchise in the U.S., located in Gulfport, Mississippi. Louisiana Fire Extinguishers Incorporated, a one-stop specialist in the prevention, detection, and extinction of fires. And finally, Navy Federal Credit Union, with 8 million members, strives to serve and enrich the lives of those in the military community. Today, it is my great pleasure to introduce our D-Day veteran panel. First, Tolly W. Fletcher was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He grew up in Denham Springs in Baton Rouge and joined the Navy when he was 17. He then went through boot camp and continued with training as a gunner's mate. He first served aboard the USS New York and participated in Operation Torch in North Africa. After escorting convoys to Casablanca, he participated in the landings at D-Day in 1944. He was transferred to the USS SC-1301, a submarine chaser, and spent time in the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. Mr. Fletcher was discharged in October 1945 as a gunner's mate, 3rd class. Vito Mastrangelo was born in Visalia, California. He was drafted into the Army at the end of his first semester of college. He completed basic training and was placed in charge of a squad of 25 men with the 3rd Platoon, 607th Quartermaster Graves Registration Company, and sent to England. His training consisted of how to plan a cemetery. Mr. Mastrangelo landed in Normandy, and his first sight was a driver of a Jeep who had been shot between the eyes. They moved through France to spend 3 months in Belgium, where during the Battle of the Bulge, they buried around 350 bodies a day. He was asked to stay after liberation to help relocate bodies from Belgium to the United States. Mr. Mastrangelo was discharged from the Army in 1945 as a tech sergeant. Third, Mr. Henry Arthur Dube served in the U.S. Army Air Corps during World War II. He enlisted in July 1941 and served in the 12th Air Force, 313th Troop Carrier Squadron in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy from 1942 to 44. In 1944-45, he was part of the 9th Air Force, 34th Troop Carrier Squadron in England, France, and Germany. He received the Air Medal, Theater Medal with 8 bronze stars. Our moderator for today's panel is my colleague, Hannah Dailey. Hannah has worked as a historian at the National World War II Museum since 2015. Since joining the museum, she has traveled the country extensively, conducting oral histories with World War II veterans and Holocaust survivors. She has conducted thus far more than 500 oral history interviews to date, several of which are showcased in our permanent galleries. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our panel.
All right, well, let's get started. Let's start with you, Mr. Dube. So I understand if you could tell us a little bit about what you were told about the mission before you when you were in England.
Flew C-47 transport, towed the giant gliders, flew paratroopers. We also flew fuel and ammunition to the front lines. And after the war, we also flew the prisoners of war that had been taken prisoner back to the homeland, France, and so on. We flew in, we flew formation. There were about 3,000 planes in my group, and we had to contend. We went in at 800 feet. That allowed the parachutes to open, but at the same time, it was just above the machine gun fire. Everybody got their 80-pound gear with them before you jump? Okay. So the fighter, and we stayed below, we had to stay below 3,000 feet so that either the paratroopers or the gliders could come down hard. And above 3,000 feet, the howitzer shells would explode and then blow the plane up. So 800 to 3,000 feet was a comfort zone, let's say. Weather was bad. You heard gunfire, cannon, and so on, and you always hoped that you weren't flying over where the fortifications were. You couldn't see ahead. You couldn't recognize your targets ahead of time. We had one navigator for every 8 planes, and if the navigators got lost, we got lost too. So that's it. Any questions? It was a fun trip, but I wouldn't want to do it again. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Fletcher, after you had already participated in the North Africa campaign, what did you think of the upcoming D-Day invasion?
How did we what?
What did you think of the upcoming D-Day invasion?
Well, primarily I thought England was going to sink from everything that was going on over there for all of the soldiers and equipment that was stacked everywhere that you could see. And there was much excitement, of course, and people worried about exactly when it was going to happen and how effective it was going to be. So all of us were quite concerned about when and what part we were going to take in it. And as it turned out, our job was to escort. I was on a subchaser 1301. It was a small wooden craft with a shallow draft, and they used us to escort landing craft into the Utah beach. And primarily because we had radar and that type of gear so that we knew exactly where to take them so that they would get to the proper landing. And it got pretty noisy for a while we were on the way in. And but our ship was very lucky. We had no damage, whatever, or no one got hurt. And it was the most shocking part was on the way in when you see all the bodies that were already in the water. We were there on the very, very early on the first day of June the 6th. And of course, you were quite unsure of what was going to happen and whatnot. But we had no trouble with our job that we had to do. And in situations like that, you pretty much have to just close your mind and go ahead and do what you're going to do. And soon as we got our troops to the shore, well, we turned about, and our job was to search for submarines in the area. So that's pretty much what our job was that particular day. And I suppose you say we just did it. Thank you.
Sounds like you had a fun trip.
And Mr. Fletcher, what were your thoughts at the time of the men that you were helping get to the beach? Sorry. What were your thoughts at the time of the men that you were landing on the beach?
I don't really know what our thoughts were at that time. I mean, we were
Okay, not a problem.
about the men that were landing on the beach. We had been concerned with them for quite a while, starting when they started unloading from the transport. The seas were so rough that the landing craft were bouncing up and down probably 3 to 4 feet, and the guys coming down off those rope ladders were in very dangerous position on it. And once they were off, the water was still so rough that the water spray was going over into the landing craft while they were going in. And at that point, we was concerned whether they would even be able to make it in there because the water was so rough. But we knew that there would be people that didn't make it once they got there, but in a way, we really lucked out because we happened to be going into the area where there was really the least resistance of any of the 5 different places where they made the invasion. So, and it was lucky because because of that, our troops were able to make a good swing around and get a good landing area so that they could protect it. And as it turned out, it was really a good thing that that particular area wasn't under really heavy defensive positions.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Mastrangelo, as being part of the 607th Quartermaster Graves Registration Company, what were you told about your job after the invasion?
Well, we really knew what we had to do. We trained for it in the States. After basic training, you have to go to a technical school taught by civilians at that time, and I failed. I failed. They wanted to make a mechanic out of me. I didn't want cracked knuckles and things like that, crawling under cars. So I failed. So they called me into headquarters, says, we're going to start a new company. And if you're qualified, you're going to go from buck private to staff sergeant. Hey, that paid about $20 more a month. That was big money back then. You could buy a lot of hamburgers for $20 a month. A lot of them. So I went into this headquarters. They says, if you qualify, this company's called Graves Registration. I didn't know what the words meant, but I found out very soon. First place they took us, is to Denver General Hospital to see an operation performed on a dead man. The soldiers that walked out that day never qualified, but I remember that $20 more a month. So I stuck it out. Then we moved over to Portland, Oregon. They found a man that drowned in Columbia River. There again, we went and saw this other operation. Make a long story short, I survived, and we trained how to bury the dead.
What was it like when you landed on the beach?
Terrible. Chaos. What we trained for and what we saw over there was two different things. Two different things. Engineers went in first to remove booby traps off of those things up on the beaches. And they all didn't survive, so somebody had to take care of them. We couldn't get up on the bluff. If you see Private Ryan, that cemetery there, we couldn't get up there for a week. So we buried 468 right there on the beach. What held us back? Somebody was firing down at us all week. Finally, they sent up three Rangers up there. They found the person killed her. That way we were able to get up on the high bluffs, and that's where Normandy Cemetery is at this time and forever. 3 months later, in early September, by that time we had buried 18,000. Today, there's only 9,000 there. The other 9,000 came back to the States. So when I went back 50 years later, everything looks different to me. I asked, what happened here? What happened is there were so many empty graves, they had to consolidate the whole cemetery over again. At my time, they put wooden crosses. When I went back 50 years later, marble crosses. And what a beautiful cemetery. Beautiful. So in early September, they broke through at St. Lo, France, and we proceeded up to Paris. But the Americans couldn't go in first. We had to wait for the French troops. So we spent a day or two on the outskirts of Paris. And from there was a few temporary cemeteries through northern France, and those bodies were taken up soon after and buried in permanent cemeteries. From there, we moved into Luxembourg, and then into Belgium. There's another cemetery there called St. Louis. Forgot now. But it's a beautiful cemetery, and there was 18,000 buried there too.
Just have a quick question. When you were burying the dead and sometimes reinterring their bodies,
Yes.
You talked about beautification of the cemetery.
Yes.
Could you speak
Yes.
a little bit about that?
When the Battle of the Bulge started, our captain said we have to beautify the American cemetery and also the German cemetery. And in case the Germans broke through, we had to show that we all also cared about the German dead also.
Thank you. Now I have a couple more questions.
Yes.
So what comes to mind when you think about it now? This is a question for each one of you. When you think about 75 years ago today, what do you think of?
What I think about, I never forget the dead bodies. I never forget. 2 years ago, we went back to Belgium, and I wanted to go. The doctor says, you can't fly no more. But we went. I went back to that cemetery in Belgium. It was early morning. My legs are not well anymore, so I couldn't walk down to the boys. Pardon me.
Do you want to take a minute?
I can't forget those boys. Every day. Every day. I was in church a couple of weeks ago, and the priest says, any veterans in here, please stand. I told him my story. I said, Wallace, I can't forget. He says, you have to. That's why there's so many veterans committing suicide. The veterans, the VA has treated me as 100% disabled. I got PSD something A or something, I forget now what it is. And the VA has treated me well. I can't complain. I can't complain.
Can we move on to the next person real quick?
Yes?
Okay.
What?
I'm going to ask the next person real quick, okay?
Okay, go ahead.
You want to take a break? Okay.
I don't care.
All right, Mr. Dube, so what comes to your mind? You did really good. Mr. Dube, what comes to your mind when you think about D-Day 75 years ago today?
Well, I hope everybody here will keep this memory going because it's part of our heritage, and we need patriotism to build a good country. Without patriotism, I think a nation falls apart, and anything. Very, very, very important, really, to have this kind of roots, and I hope it will continue, live forever. Incidentally, as a child, my dad used to introduce me to Civil War veterans. I knew about 20 of them, and here we are. This is quite a long time ago. And I hope if there's children in the audience, say when they're 95 years old, they'll say, I used to know World War II veterans. And so here we are.
All right, and last but not least, Mr. Fletcher, what comes to your mind when you think about D-Day, 75 years ago today?
Well, D-Day pretty much lined up my life to some extent. The discipline and everything that went into my training to go into these things. And as it turns out, apparently it made a vast difference as far as Europe and especially Germany and in relation to the Soviets. And I went back to Normandy about 4 years ago. And it kind of locks you up when you get to walking back on the beaches. And everything has changed so much. And of course, you see the huge cemeteries there with where we were at Omaha was probably 15,000 graves in it that paid the price for us to have a free country. But it was a touching thing to be able to go back there and see the changes, and spent a lot of time in France while I was there. And they didn't really, I met quite a few people that knew I was a veteran and whatnot. And there was only one or two that really acted like that they appreciated the fact that we had come there. And that bothered me a little bit. But our country has, I felt like, our values in this country, I feel like, have really gone down since the time of World War II. In the way people were in World War II and the way they are now. So, but I won't preach on that. So, thank you.
All right, I think we're going to open up for questions now for any of the veterans.
Questions?
Sorry, give us 1 second. There's going to be someone with a microphone coming around.
Gentlemen, thank you all. My dad passed away last year. Fire patrol officer, ED, destroyed World War II South Pacific. Shipped to 13 and 14,000 stars. So, and the combat veteran did a job. I felt every ounce of anguish that you guys expressed to me. And I'm trying to keep myself together. I have a real simple question that I think everybody would like to know. On the morning of June 6, 1944, how old were each of you then?
Me?
All three of you, yes, sir.
I was 19.
I can't hear him.
I went in at age 18. I came out at age 22.
Well, on the morning of June 6, how old were you?
What's the question?
Speak up to me.
How old were you on June 6, 1944?
I would have been 19 or 20.
And you, sir?
So
I was 20 on May the 2nd. We landed on D-Day, the 6th of June. We were all young men at that time. You know, I hate to get into politics, and I hope I don't rub somebody bad. Let the wars be conducted by the damn generals, and forget about the politicians. There's not one war won after Second World War. Vietnam never came to conclusion. Korea didn't come to the conclusion. Afghanistan, Iraq, because the politics had a long nose. They stuck their nose everywhere. Hey, don't quote this 95-year-old man, please. I don't want to get in trouble. Yep. Thank you. I have a lot more to talk about. I never forgot. I got a good mind yet. I can remember dates and places and things like that. And when I start reminiscing, I kind of break up a little bit. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
Don't be sorry.
But I tell you, those boys were well cared for. Don't worry about that. We seen to it. We seen to it. I was in another. It's amazing what these young men did at that time. Like this man here flying up, you know, and other occupations we had to do them. And I tell you, when you train with buddies for 2 and 3 years, I mean, they're your brother. I cried my eyes out when the first guys started going home. You had to have 90 points to go home. So it took me a few months to get the 90 points. And I finally I went home December 1st, 1945, and I got home at Christmas Day. My folks never knew what I did, not a word. My mother, my father never told them nothing. Nothing was said for 50 years. Now a newscaster, every day you see this and you see that and see that. You see all these tragic things that happen in school, and they broadcast that thing over and over and over every day for a week before they get off the darn subject. Thank you.
Be careful.
What?
Be careful.
I know somebody will shoot me before I get out of here. That's okay. That's okay. I've lived a beautiful life. I'm ready. You know, they say you'll never get out of this world alive. So.
All right, next question, please.
Oh, by the way, I'm from Central California. Any Californians here? There you are. Hey, I'm from Visalia, California. San Francisco? San Jose. Very good. Hey, San Jose is not what it used to be.
Mr. Fletcher.
A lot of foreigners.
All right. Sir, your question.
When you were waiting to go in on the score,
What did he say?
things were in pretty good order. But when did you begin to realize that it was going to be chaos? And when did you decide that things were coming back into order for our...
Do you want to take this one?
What's the question?
He's asking, when did you first realize it was complete chaos?
That question, I think,
Well,
was
war is chaos, so it doesn't come as a surprise.
All of you to answer.
Actually, this was the first time that they had used airborne, and they didn't know, for example, that there would be tremendous turbulence, and they didn't realize that consider the weather factor, for example, which it can certainly throw a monkey wrench, and there's ground fire, there's shells going off, the fumes, and the visibility is bad, bad, bad. And anyway, it's a calculated risk, and you make allowance, and you go with it, go with the flow, I guess. And if you have a superior force, you're the winner. Did I answer your question?
Mr. Fletcher, if you would like to take a go. When did you first realize it was complete chaos, is this gentleman's question.
Well, there's about a standard rule. It's kind of like Murphy's Law. You go into a huge operation like this, you make all of these detailed plans that this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and that's going to happen. Well, as soon as you get into business, it all goes to pot, and that's when you get everything all messed up. Because there's never been a war whenever you made all these plans where things were going to go exactly like you predicted. So that's when chaos starts. Just immediately after you start the landing.
And Mr. Mastrangelo? Yes. When did you first realize it was complete chaos?
As soon as I got on the shore, it was nothing like we trained. We didn't know. But we really found out real fast what we had to do. You had to clean the beaches. That was our job.
All right. Chrissy, do you have one more question?
I can't hear that at all.
He's having trouble with that.
Oh. You woke me up. Is that my question or somebody else's?
For everybody. Mr. Dube, if you want to start, if you had to do it all over again, would you?
What?
If you had to do it all over again, would you?
Certainly, but not at my age.
You mean our age?
All right, yes. Tying your shoelaces becomes an impossibility.
I think that most of us would do it again. We might wish we could leave a few parts of it out, but no doubt we would have done it again. After all, we were kids. We really didn't have very much smart. And asked me how old I was for Normandy. Well, I was 19. For the North African invasion, I was 18.
Would you do it all over again if you could?
In a minute.
But yes, I would do it again.
Yes, sir. I'm a Navy veteran, and I served aircrew with a lot of non-vets, and they wouldn't talk to civilians about to the rest of their air crew. My father was in the 735th Railway Operating Battalion all through Europe. He came in a little while after D-Day. And he never spoke about one word of it through my whole childhood that I know of. But he did give me his discharge papers, and he said when he was gone that I could learn about what happened, and luckily I did through some of the other relatives of these people. I am just happy that you guys are able to tell your story to these people, this very important story. And I wish my father would have been able to. So thank you.
What is that?
We're kind of glad we can tell them too.
And she's a therapist, and she published in Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul 4 times. And the last time, she talked about how you can do your own therapy. And one of the things I noticed is that there are ways to handle post-traumatic stress syndrome. So for example, she had a Vietnam vet that worked in the cemetery, and every time it rained, he had flashbacks. So she moved him out of the cemetery, and he got cured.
I've just met Grover over here. He lies about his age. He's turning 98, but he says he's 96. And he also was, he also was in the Air Force, and a very important role in the role they all did. But I guess you're also a shy girl, because you should be sitting up there with those guys. Anybody else who's being a little shy that was in that war, please stand up so we can recognize. Thank you so much for your service, all of you. I know that y'all were training for a long period of time before you went into battle. But once you were in battle, how many days or maybe weeks went by before you felt that the confidence that you had would lead to victory for World War II?
Mr. Dube?
Yes.
He's asking, after being in battle, how long was it till the confidence that you had that you would be victorious, that the U.S. would be victorious?
We were watching the events in the Pacific, actually, and that was Midway was a turning point there. So it looked hopeful right when we were victorious at Midway. In Europe, it seemed for sure that the Allies were going to be victorious because we could, the work that was going on in the United States and producing all the necessary equipment, for example. And we were, well, the German U-boats were sinking a lot of our ships, believe me. But as we developed submarine measures and developed countermeasures and step by step, it seemed to be going our way. You know, first victory was when Rommel was defeated in Africa, and then Mussolini retired to Italy, and then after Normandy, we were moving towards Germany step by step by step. So it looked like a sure thing right from the start, and we gave it our best. Yes, sir.
Thank you all for your service and wonderful stories. I'd like to ask the C-47 pilot, I suppose you were a pilot, how did you know when to release the paratroops?
How many went?
After you crossed into France, how did you know when the troops would get out of your airplane?
How did you know when to release the gliders?
Well, the lead, remember there were 3,000 planes, for example, with navigators on board, and they had targets. They knew essentially whether, if we were off target by 10, 15 miles, they knew at least their navigation was good enough that they knew where the drop should be. And the signal really, there was radio silence, but there were flashed lights. And they would, even in each plane, there was a drop light. And when that came on, that was the time to jump. And that's what happened.
Hannah, I have another question over here.
During the war, what were your thoughts on the other Allied powers or Axis powers, the countries you were fighting with or against?
Mr. Fletcher, he's asking, what were your thoughts about the other Allies and the Axis powers while you were in the war?
Well, I think the best thing for the Allies was when Germany attacked Russia.
The other guy.
And
You know,
it certainly took a lot of the load away from the other people, from the Allies, and being able to get things going. And whenever you begin to hear about all of the things that the Germans had done to the Jewish people, among others, it certainly made a difference. Of course, that was late in the war. But one of the largest mistakes that was made in that war was that Churchill and Roosevelt sort of let Stalin push them around when they made all these agreements that was going to take place after the war. And as it eventually turned out, it was all right, but of course Germany really suffered for it, and which they well deserved to from their previous activities. But I don't know, Russia was pushing so hard to get the invasion started before everyone was ready to do it that that made us make a few mistakes in our plans and so forth. But everything turned out well, eventually. So, thank you.
We have a question over here.
Again, we thank you for your service. Yes. Yes, thank you for your service. We're very indebted to you. I hope we've expressed that effectively. I know that letters from home were very important. I wondered how often you received letters and how they affected or sustained you through the war.
How often did you receive letters, and how did they affect you or sustain you during the war?
I was not much of a writer. I'm still not. And at that time, you had the V-mail going back to the States. It was a very small postcard-sized letter, and I don't know how it was transmitted over wire to the States. You could never speak or write where you were, what you did. So inspectors would throw those V-mail cards out. So that's how we corresponded. I didn't write home too often. No. I know I should have, but I didn't. Especially after my brother passed away in India. He was in the Air Force. He's a mechanic. I don't know if I said this before. He's a mechanic for those planes going over into China every day. And he got killed on R&R, of all places.
Someone asked a little before when we felt that the war was well in hand. If you had been there on D-Day and seen those thousands of planes going over, there was virtually, in every direction, you couldn't help but see hundreds and thousands of planes going over. And a short time later, you see the next layer coming back from over there. And there's no doubt that things are going in your favor when you have that sort of superiority in the air. So within 2 weeks, when the ground troops had their foothold set down, you know it was close to over. So.
And I have one more question.
Yeah. Hi, with the knowledge and experience that you have from the war, what one piece of advice would you tell your younger selves?
Mr. Dube?
Yes.
With your knowledge and everything you went through with the war, what piece of advice would you give your younger self?
Well, democracy is not for free. You have to work for it. And if you're going to come out ahead, you got to make a contribution. Your heart's got to be in it. And actually, you've got to actually, like counting your blessings, you have to put an effort in that, and pray to God, and be a decent human being, and be patriotic, and go for it, and hope for the best, and God will prevail.
All right, Mr. Fletcher, same question. What advice would you give your younger self?
Well, I think we need to start by raising our families somewhat to the standards that they were previous to World War II and shortly afterwards. Things have changed so much that so many of the new parents think that they need to be friends with their kids instead of being parents, and raising them so that they have thinking of their own, so that they can plan and raise their own life, and they have time to do that, to keep to keep our country on a straight line instead of all of these. I know it's not about the war, but it's about our country. And the country's in desperate need of having these people to be able to think for themselves instead of having somebody else trying to brainwash them into what they think that the country ought to be. And that's all.
Advice?
Yeah, based on your experience in the war.
I don't know where to begin.
Okay. Begin in the middle.
The advice I would give is this, and I know your parents probably would disagree with me, over in Europe. Everyone of age 18 serves 2 years in the military. The only thing my dad never gave me a compliment, but I understood Italian that he spoke to my mother. He went away, a little boy came back a man.
All right, thank y'all so much for taking the time out of your schedules, traveling to the museum, and withstanding all of these questions for us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
I hope somebody recorded this.
I think so.
I hope they did.